I was standing in the Walmart aisle 3 weeks ago, and I noticed something most people walk right past. A shelf tag had changed twice in 1 month. Not once, twice. And nobody around me even looked up. That's the thing about price changes. They don't announce themselves. They just happen quietly, one small sticker at a time, until one day your cart costs $40 more and you can't figure out why. I started paying attention after that. I started checking receipts, comparing them month to month, reading the supplier statements that get buried in trade publications nobody outside the industry ever reads. And what I found changed how I shop. There are certain items right now that are either getting more expensive fast, getting harder to find, or quietly shrinking while the price stays the same. Some of it comes down to tariffs. Some of it comes down to weather halfway across the world. Some of it is just supply chains that never fully recovered. Today, I'm walking you through 15 of them. Real items, real reasons, no guessing. And somewhere between number 4 and number 8, there's one that genuinely surprised me. I didn't expect it. You probably won't either. I'm not going to tell you which one it is yet. You'll know it when you hear it. If this is the kind of thing you want to know before it shows up in your total at checkout, subscribe now, because this list is going to keep growing through the year. Let's get into it. Item number 1, canned pineapple. This one caught me off guard the first time I saw it. Canned pineapple, the kind almost every household has in the pantry, for fruit salad or a glazed ham, has been climbing in price. A big part of that comes down to tariffs on goods from Southeast Asia, where most of the fruit is grown and processed. Add in weather-related crop shortages in that region, and you get a product that costs noticeably more than it did a year ago. Trade publications that track supplier pricing have flagged this exact combination. Tariffs stacked on top of a weaker harvest, as one of the clearer examples of a grocery item getting squeezed from two directions at once. I checked this myself last time I was at the store. I used to grab 2 cans without thinking about it. Last month I picked one up, looked at the price, and put one back. It wasn't a huge jump on a single can, but multiply that across a full pantry stock and it adds up fast. If you use canned pineapple regularly, this is one where buying a few extra cans now, while the shelf price is still close to what you remember, makes more sense than waiting. Canned goods don't expire quickly, so there's no real downside to stocking a few. This is a small item, but it's the kind of small item that quietly drains your grocery budget without you noticing. Item number 2, aluminum foil. Here's one almost nobody thinks about until they run out. Aluminum foil prices have moved up noticeably, and the reason isn't really about the foil itself. It's about the raw aluminum. A large share of the aluminum used in American products comes through Canada, and new import costs on that metal have pushed manufacturing costs up across the board. Brands have openly said the increases are tied to tariffs, global supply pressure, and rising energy costs all landing at once. This is one of those items where the cost increase happens quietly. Nobody makes an announcement. The roll just costs more the next time you buy it. I actually went back and compared a receipt from last year to one from a few weeks ago. Same brand, same size roll. The difference was enough that I did a double take. I asked a cashier if she'd noticed people commenting on it, and she said yes, more than once, mostly from older customers who buy the same items every week and notice small changes fastest. If you use foil often, for cooking, freezing, or meal prep, this is a good one to buy a couple extra rolls of now, rather than one at a time. It stores indefinitely, so there's zero risk in stocking up. Small item, real pattern. This is exactly the kind of cost creep that adds up over a year without you ever noticing the moment it happened. Item number 3. Shrimp. Shrimp has gotten more expensive lately, and it's one of the items that regular price tracking studies keep flagging as a consistent mover. A lot of shrimp sold in the US is imported, and import costs have been rising the same way they have for other seafood and packaged goods. On top of that, feed costs and fuel costs for the boats and farms that supply shrimp have gone up too, which pushes the final shelf price higher even before it reaches the store. I used to buy the big bag of frozen shrimp for stir-fry almost every other week. When I checked last month, the same bag cost noticeably more than it did at the start of the year. I asked someone I know who works in food distribution, and he said seafood has been one of the more unpredictable categories because so much of it depends on international shipping costs that can shift fast. If shrimp is a regular part of your meals, frozen shrimp stores well for months. Buying a bag or two when you see a fair price, rather than waiting until you're out, protects you from paying the higher price later. This is a good example of a food that feels stable until the month it suddenly isn't. Item number 4. Chocolate and cacao-based products. Now here's the one I mentioned at the start. If you've been waiting to hear which item surprised me the most, this is it. Cacao prices have been under serious pressure due to weather conditions affecting harvests in the main growing regions. That means chocolate bars, baking chocolate, cocoa powder, and chocolate-based snacks have all been quietly getting more expensive, sometimes shrinking in size while the price holds steady. This one surprised me because chocolate feels like the kind of product that should never really change. It's been the same on the shelf for decades. But when I actually compared bar sizes side by side with older packaging I had saved a photo of, the bar was smaller. Same price, same wrapper design, just less chocolate inside. I mentioned this to a friend who bakes constantly, and she said she'd started buying cocoa powder in bulk specifically because she noticed the trend early and didn't want to keep repurchasing at a rising price every few months. If chocolate or baking cocoa is something you use regularly, this is worth stocking up on now. It has a long shelf life if stored in a cool, dry place, and buying ahead protects you from both the price increases and the shrinking package sizes that are already happening. You don't want to be the person who finds out at checkout that their favorite bar somehow costs more and weighs less than it did last year. Item number 5. Coffee has been moving in a similar direction to chocolate, and for a similar reason. Weather events affecting coffee-growing regions have limited harvests, and that scarcity shows up on your grocery shelf months later as a higher price tag. This is one of those categories where the increase creeps in slowly. Nobody wakes up one day and sees coffee cost double. It's a few cents at a time, bag after bag, until a year later you realize you're paying meaningfully more for the exact same brand and roast. I track my coffee spending fairly closely because I go through a bag every couple of weeks. Comparing this year to last year, the difference is real, not dramatic, but real. When I looked into it, industry reports consistently point to the same root cause, weather disruption at the source, not anything happening at the retail level. If you're a regular coffee drinker, buying an extra bag or two when you see a reasonable price, especially if it's whole bean or ground coffee with a longer shelf life, is a smart hedge against the slow creep this category has been showing. This is about protecting a small daily habit from becoming a bigger expense than it needs to be. Item number 6. Avocados. Avocados have been a roller coaster, and most of it traces back to tariff threats on goods coming from Mexico, where the vast majority of US avocados are grown. Price tracking across multiple retailers has shown avocado prices moving up noticeably faster than a lot of other produce. And unlike a lot of items on this list, avocados don't store well long-term, which makes the price swings even more frustrating for regular buyers. I noticed this one myself because guacamole is a staple in my house. I started checking the price every single time I shopped, almost like a habit, and some weeks it barely moved, while other weeks it jumped noticeably. When I asked around, people in the produce business pointed to the same explanation everyone else does: tariff pressure combined with regional supply timing. Since avocados don't freeze or store well raw, the practical move here isn't stockpiling. It's buying when the price dips and skipping the week when it spikes, or switching to guacamole made in smaller batches so you're not overpaying on a big batch during an expensive week. This one is less about stocking up and more about timing your purchase around the pattern. Item number 7. Eggs. Eggs have been one of the most talked about items in grocery stores for a while now, and for good reason. Avian flu outbreaks have repeatedly disrupted the egg supply, and that shows up directly in shelf prices, sometimes swinging in both directions within the same month depending on the region. What's interesting is that this isn't consistent everywhere. Some tracking has actually shown egg prices at Walmart decreasing in certain months, even while other retailers in the same market saw increases. That kind of split tells you the supply disruption is real, but it's also uneven, which is exactly the kind of thing worth watching closely rather than assuming a straight line. I check egg prices almost every trip now because they've become such a moving target. I spoke with someone who works in grocery retail, and she said egg pricing has become one of the hardest categories to predict internally because the supply disruptions come in waves tied to outbreak reports. Since eggs don't store for months, the smart move is less about stockpiling and more about buying when the price is favorable in your area and not assuming next week's price will match this week's. This is a category where staying informed matters more than stocking up. Item number 8. Bread and wheat-based staples. Bread doesn't get talked about as much as eggs or avocados, but wheat-based staples have shown steady, if less dramatic, price movement across multiple retailers. Some of this ties back to broader ingredient cost pressure, and some of it ties to the same packaging and transport costs affecting almost every packaged good right now. It's not a dramatic spike. It's a slow, steady climb that's easy to miss because bread is something most people buy on autopilot. I actually didn't notice this one myself until I compared old receipts side by side. The per loaf price had crept up gradually over about a year, small enough each time that it never triggered any reaction from me at checkout, but adding up to a real difference when I looked at the full year. Bread doesn't store long fresh, but many wheat-based staples like pasta, rice, and shelf-stable mixes do. If you rely on wheat-based staples regularly, rotating in a few extra shelf-stable versions during a normal shopping trip is a low-risk way to buffer against the slow creep. This is one of those items where patience and awareness matter more than panic. Item number 9. Store-brand boxed dinners. This is the one that most people wouldn't expect to be on a list like this because store-brand items are supposed to be the budget-friendly option. But some tracking has shown certain private label packaged foods, like boxed macaroni and cheese, moving up in price even as the store brand remains cheaper overall than name brands. The increase isn't huge on any single box, but the direction is consistent, and it's happening on items people buy specifically because they're supposed to be the affordable choice. I noticed this because I buy the same store brand mac and cheese almost every week for my kids. When I looked at a price comparison over the last couple of years, the box that used to be under 50 cents now costs closer to 60. That's not a dramatic number on its own, but when it's a staple you buy weekly, it adds up over a year in a way that's easy to miss. Boxed dinners like this store well for a long time. If this is a weekly staple in your house, buying a few extra boxes when you see them at a fair price protects you from the slow creep that's already showing up in the data. Nobody expects the cheap option to get more expensive. That's exactly why it's easy to miss. Item number 10. Frozen vegetables. Frozen vegetables have generally held up better than fresh produce on pricing, but they haven't been completely immune, especially items tied to imported ingredients or specialty blends. The logic here is straightforward. Frozen produce depends on the same supply chains as fresh produce, just with an extra processing and freezing step added in. When the raw ingredient costs rise, that eventually reaches the frozen aisle too, just a bit slower than it hits the fresh produce section. I switched a lot of my vegetable shopping to frozen a while back, specifically because it stores longer and the price has historically been more stable. When I checked prices last month, most items were holding steady, but a few specialty blends and imported vegetable mixes had ticked up noticeably compared to the plain single vegetable bags. If you rely on frozen vegetables, sticking to the simple single ingredient bags rather than the fancier blends, and buying a few extra when you see a good price, is a solid way to keep this part of your grocery bill predictable. This is one of the more stable categories on this list, but stable doesn't mean immune, and it's worth watching the same way as everything else. Item number 11. Canned goods in general. Beyond pineapple specifically, canned goods as a broader category have felt pressure from the same forces hitting individual items, packaging costs, transport costs, and in some cases tariffs on imported ingredients used in the canning process itself. This is a category people tend to underestimate because a single can feels cheap no matter what. But when you're buying canned beans, canned tomatoes, canned soup, and canned fruit every week, small increases across all of them compound into a real number by the end of the month. I started tracking my canned goods spending specifically after noticing the pineapple increase, and once I looked closely, several other canned items had crept up too, just quietly enough that I hadn't clocked it before. Canned goods have one of the longest shelf lives in the entire store. If there's ever a category where stocking up genuinely makes sense with almost no downside, this is it. Buying extra when you see a reasonable price protects you from paying more later on, something that doesn't expire for years. This is the definition of a slow leak in a grocery budget, one nobody notices until they add it all up. Item number 12. Ground beef has actually moved in a more encouraging direction recently, with some retailers cutting prices meaningfully as part of broader efforts to ease pressure on shoppers dealing with inflation. That's worth mentioning here because it's a good reminder that not everything on a list like this is bad news. Some categories are actually getting a break, at least for now, and ground beef has been one of them, with price cuts reported in the double digits in some cases. I noticed this myself because ground beef is a weekly staple for my family, and the price at checkout was noticeably lower than I expected the last 2 times I shopped. When I looked into why, it came back to retailers responding directly to inflation pressure by cutting margins on specific high-demand items. This is actually a good window to stock up if you have freezer space. Ground beef freezes well for months, so buying extra while the price is favorable, rather than waiting for it to climb back up, is a smart move while the window is open. Not every item on this list is about scarcity or rising costs. Sometimes the smart move is recognizing when a price is genuinely good and acting on it before it changes back. Item number 13. Cookies and packaged snacks. Packaged cookies and snack foods have shown up repeatedly in price tracking comparisons as one of the more consistent categories getting more expensive, even when other parts of the grocery bill hold steady. Some of this ties back to the same cacao and sugar pressures affecting chocolate more broadly, and some of it ties back to packaging and transport costs that hit almost every boxed and bagged product on the shelf right now. Either way, the direction has been the same for a while, quietly up, month after month. I noticed this with a specific brand of sandwich cookies my family buys almost every week. I compared the price from about a year ago to now, and the increase was real, even though the package looked identical and the recipe hadn't changed at all. When I mentioned it to a co-worker, she said she'd started buying 2 packages at a time, specifically to avoid restocking at a higher price a few weeks later. If packaged snacks are a regular part of your shopping list, buying an extra box or bag when the price feels fair is a simple way to get ahead of the next increase. These products have a long enough shelf life that there's very little downside to having a small buffer at home. This is one of those categories where the increase is small enough on any single item that it's easy to shrug off, right up until you add up a year of boxes. Item number 14. Milk. Milk deserves a mention here for the opposite reason as most of this list. Multiple price comparisons have actually shown milk getting cheaper over the past couple of years at several major retailers, dropping by a meaningful amount per gallon compared to a few years ago. This is a good reminder that dairy pricing depends heavily on its own separate set of pressures, feed costs, herd size, and regional supply, and those pressures haven't pushed in the same direction as tariffs or weather-driven crop shortages have for other items on this list. I actually noticed this myself while comparing a full basket of groceries recently. Milk was one of the only items where the total was clearly lower than what I remembered paying a couple of years back. I asked someone who works in dairy distribution about it, and he said supply has simply caught up with demand in a way that hasn't happened yet for items like eggs or coffee. Since milk doesn't store for more than a couple of weeks even refrigerated, there's no real stockpiling strategy here. The takeaway is simpler. If you've been assuming milk is getting more expensive along with everything else, it's worth double-checking your own receipts because the data suggests otherwise. Not every item on a list like this needs a defensive strategy. Sometimes the smart move is just noticing the good news before you assume the worst. So here's the pattern once you step back and look at all 12 of these together. Some of it comes down to tariffs stacking costs on imported goods. Some of it comes down to weather-disrupting harvests halfway around the world. Some of it is disease affecting supply, like with eggs. And some of it, like ground beef, is actually good news. Retailers cutting prices to ease the pressure everyone's been feeling. None of this is random. It's connected. Global supply chains, trade policy, weather, and disease all feed into the same grocery cart, and most people never connect the dots until they're standing at checkout wondering why the total feels higher than it should. The point isn't to panic. It's to notice the pattern early, the way I did, and make small, smart decisions before everyone else catches on. Buy a few extra cans here, skip the expensive week on avocados there, take advantage of a price cut on ground beef while it lasts. Most people will figure this out eventually. They'll notice it at checkout, complain about it, and move on without ever understanding why. You're not most people. You noticed it here first. If this kind of insider breakdown is useful to you, subscribe, because I'm tracking more of these patterns every month, and there's another list coming soon that I think is going to surprise you even more than this one did. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.